Okay, welcome back. So we go into our final panel of the afternoon. Unfortunately, the moderator of our next panel, Dave McCleary, missed his flight and is unable to be with us this afternoon. As a result, he has asked Jeff Rice to moderate this panel. This final panel is entitled Engaging the Business Community. Will you join me in welcoming our final panel to the stage? Our moderator, Jeff Rice, is Vice President Responsible Sourcing at Walmart. The Responsible Sourcing team works through the business and in collaboration with other stakeholders to help address risks to workers in the supply chain with a focus on combating forced labor and underage labor, addressing unsafe working conditions, and promoting the dignity of women. Jeff has spent more than 10 years working on sustainability and human rights programs in buying, sourcing, and supply chains at Walmart and at the Sustainability Consortium. Through this work, he has had the opportunity to serve on numerous strategic technical boards and committees, including those of the Consumer Goods Forum, the Sustainability Consortium, GS1, among others. Jeff graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in physics and math from Missouri State University and earned a master's in business administration from the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. He serves on the board of the Northwest Arkansas Land Trust and the Bentonville Schools. Please join me in welcoming our business engagement panel. Thank you all for being here.
All right, thank you all so much for the opportunity, and Dave sends his regrets that he couldn't be here, and so I'm gonna do my best to stand in for him. Thank you all so much for giving us the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about things happening in the business community on this issue that we've been hearing about all day. I really appreciate the two panelists that are joining me. Genevieve and Patty represent two organizations that are really leading in this space. So excited to hear and learn from them over the coming 45 minutes or so. I'm going to start by just asking each of them to introduce themselves, introduce their roles within their organization, and then talk a little bit about why their companies think this is an issue they should engage in, why this is a priority for them. So maybe we'll start with Genevieve.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for organizing this event. I have just learned so much about different pieces of the puzzle today, and I'm excited to share a little bit about what we do. So I'm Genevieve TAFT-VASQUEZ. I look after supply chain due diligence with regards to human and workplace rights, which includes human trafficking. And I do want to say that the piece of the puzzle that we look at is really around labor trafficking, not so much on the sex trafficking portion. And you probably all know the can of Coke, but you may not know that actually our company portfolio spans about 3,500 product lines, everything from coconut water to tea to coffee to water and everything in between. Probably not as many SKUs as Walmart, but still a pretty vast supply chain. We operate in over 200 countries and territories. And I'm really pleased that our CEO recently launched an updated company vision statement, which is refresh the world and make a difference. And so obviously we want to create brands that people love to drink, but also to create a sustainable business that makes a better shared future for the people, the communities where we operate, and the planet as well. As someone who focuses on people and human rights in the supply chain, I'm particularly pleased that now the people are really embedded into the corporate vision overall. Like many companies and the companies here, I feel like maybe based on the conversation we might be missing a telecom or a other tech company, but I think we can talk about our supply chains as they are. Like many companies, we have a human rights statement which talks about the way that we envision upholding and respecting human rights. We also have a corporate code of conduct which we call our supplier guiding principles. And these explicitly prohibit forced labor, and human trafficking. But obviously, with an issue of this magnitude, we realize that there's so much more that needs to be done, and really and we need to take innovative approaches and broad collaboration. And so over the last few years, some of the things that we've been focusing on as this issue has become increasingly in the spotlight is really updating our policies and procedures. How can we improve our due diligence? 2 is collaboration with our peers. And then 3 is using our voice. How can we use our voice as a big multinational company to talk about some of these issues? So hopefully I can talk a little bit more about those as we go along.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Genevieve. Patty?
Good afternoon. I'm very proud to be invited to speak today on behalf of Marriott International. Hopefully some of you are here staying in one of our properties in the DC area. As you know, Marriott has always had a strong commitment to operate with integrity. We have an internal commitment that says how we do business is as important as the business we do. So that ethical commitment to our operations wherever we are around the globe. And at this point, we're at approximately 7,000 properties around the globe. And between our managed and franchise portfolio, have 700,000 workers around the globe, which has quite an ability to impact places where human trafficking might occur, despite our best efforts. So I'm very involved with our efforts to promote human rights within the company, and in particular, our human trafficking prevention efforts that I'm delighted to talk to you about today.
Fantastic. Thank you both. I'll speak just for a second on Walmart. So at Walmart, we really engage on this issue because we think about our company as creating opportunity. We talk a lot about our company and the way it creates opportunity for our customers to save money and have a better life. That's our purpose, to save money and live better. We talk about the opportunity that our company creates for associates or the employees that work around the world in our company to build careers and to make themselves a better life. We also think a lot about the opportunity we can provide and we can help the communities we serve and the communities we source from to thrive. And human trafficking and forced labor are risks that really undermine that opportunity that we're working so hard to create. And so that's why we've kind of taken this on as an issue. Forced labor, fighting forced labor and combating human trafficking is something that we think is the right thing to do. We also think it's good for our business. We think it reduces risk. We think it will build trust with our customers and with other stakeholders. And so, it's in line with our purpose. We think it's the right thing to do, and I think it'll be healthy for our business. And I'll chime in a few times throughout the panel to talk just a little bit about the work we do. Let me turn to Genevieve with the start of the questions. And so you've talked a little bit about kind of why you do this. Talk to us for a little bit about kind of how you think about going about this issue. What are the types of ways you engage on this issue? What are the types of programs you have to really make progress on this?
Great. I think I should mention, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the type of work that we do, but really corporate codes of conduct probably came into being in the 1990s or so, and it was really as the shift of, especially in the textile industry, a lot of that production was moving overseas and recognizing the role of businesses in being responsible in the way that they source their product. And since those corporate code of conducts have been in place, they always had prohibited forced labor. I think from the beginning, that was always a piece of the way that we viewed responsible sourcing. But I think it's only been in the last 5 or 10 years where the labor recruitment, the vulnerabilities around migrant workers in the labor recruitment chain has really come about. And I think that's a lot because of some of the reports by NGOs like Verite and some of the migration channels. You might have seen some of those stories in the Thailand fishing industry, for instance. And then also, it really came into spotlight as well, I think into sharp focus with the Obama Executive Order 13627 that talked about government procurement and asking companies that were going to sell to the government that they could basically guarantee that the products that they were providing or the services that they were providing were not made with any sort of human trafficking or forced labor. And that really started to focus on, in the labor trafficking, around recruitment fees. And so we did a little bit of self-reflection and decided to make sure that we were updating our policies and procedures around 3 key priorities. So one is that to ensure that any worker in the supply chain is not paying recruitment fees. 2, that they maintain possession of their identity documents, so their passports. They're never asked to give up their passports, which obviously will prohibit freedom of movement. And that contract terms are understood both at the time of recruitment, so that they're not signing up for one job and then getting to the place and finding out that the job is something different. So those were kind of the 3 key things that we took up, and those were then enshrined in the Consumer Goods Forced Labor Resolution, which is like over 200 companies taking on this and saying, yeah, these are priority principles that we believe in. And so in taking those up, we then did global training with our suppliers around this, like what were our expectations. We talked to our audit firms to say, okay, now that you're going to be going out and visiting this, how do we make sure that we're looking at these key issues? And then as a result of that, then build those into the audits that we do. Probably all of the companies here, we do third-party audits at our own sites, and then we do them also at our suppliers as well. We do about 2,500 of these third-party audits per year. We've done about 25,000 since our program started, and really starting to dive into some of these issues around the vulnerabilities of labor recruitment. So that's on the auditing piece. On the peer collaboration piece, I think we'll say it's really important that you have your policies and your practices in place, and that we're holding ourselves accountable. Equally important, I think, is to make sure that we're doing this at an industry level, and that's where some of the peer collaboration, I think, is so important. And that's where we've teamed up with companies at this table and started to try to be founding members of organizations like the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment. We'll lead work streams in our industry groups on this topic. We will do joint trainings. We have an industry forum called In Progress that we will then go deliver supplier trainings focusing on these principles. And then using our voice where we can. So we hold an annual human rights conference at our campus in Atlanta, and a couple years ago we focused on the topic of human trafficking in particular. So how do we use our voice to kind of engage the broader business community on this topic? So I would say those are kind of the 3 main elements. One is around policies and practices, making sure that we're doing, we're walking the talk, and then engaging with our peers, and then 3rd, using our voice where we can on this topic.
Thanks, Genevieve. I'll build on that a little bit because I think Walmart has a similar approach in some respects. We also have a human rights statement that we've published and what we call a standards for suppliers that we hold all of our suppliers to. It's included in by reference in the contracts that suppliers sign with us. And like Genevieve said, it's great to have those public statements of what you believe in, but you have to have programs to really back that up. We do have a pretty robust auditing program. Last year did about 14,700 audits of facilities producing the products we sell. But as Genevieve said, those audits don't really do a lot of good if they aren't looking for the right things. Forced labor has always been a part of those, but as we've heard throughout today, identifying victims of forced labor and trafficking is hard. And auditors and audit firms and audit programs weren't really equipped to do that well. It's not a muscle that they had built over time, but they're getting better at it. They're starting to look for some of the indicators that Genevieve was talking about. They're starting to ask questions like information about recruitment fees that workers may have paid, both in the receiving country where they're working now, but also the sending country where they came from. They're starting to ask questions about how those workers get their money. Is that money given to them directly or deposited into a bank account that they own and control? Do they have control of their identity documents? Those types of things. And so the audit industry, the supply chain audit industry, is becoming more sophisticated in how to look for these things, but we've got a ways to go. We actually convened kind of a summit or a forum of audit programs about a year ago to work with the audit programs that are operating globally to talk about ways we can get better at identifying cases of forced labor or risks of forced labor in facilities. We also have some internal associates, so we do about 14,000 audits a year. We manage about 600 cases using case managers that we have on staff with investigators that are placed all around the world, where we look into higher risk cases, where we either hear allegations or see things in an audit that we think raise concerns or demonstrate that there's higher risk of forced labor. And so we manage about 600 of those cases. And we actually funded some forced labor investigations training through an organization called Stronger Together, so that we had some training so we could train new investigators at Walmart, but also publicly available so others could build up their training of investigators for how to spot signs of forced labor in supply chains. Because as has been discussed today, it's not always obvious when you first start to see it. So let me turn, so that's a little bit about what Walmart is doing. Let me turn to Patty and ask the same question.
Sure.
How is it you guys tackle this?
I think our position is similar but different. With Coca-Cola and Walmart, or like Coca-Cola and Walmart, we have a supplier code of conduct. We have a human rights policy. But for us, addressing human trafficking, in particular sex trafficking, is more a frontline part of our business because unfortunately, our hotels can unwillingly become venues for human trafficking. So a number of years ago, we realized that preventing this human trafficking starts with awareness and by the people who are on the front lines. So in 2016, Marriott launched a human trafficking awareness training program for on-property staff. That's your front desk agents, your housekeepers, to teach them what are the indicators of human trafficking and what may be going on in front of my own eyes that I should be alerting others to. The training was incredibly successful. It was very well received by employees. They felt very empowered by understanding that the company wasn't turning a blind eye to this issue and that they had steps that they could take if they saw something, how to say something. We developed the training in-house in collaboration with Expat USA, who has been a terrific partner to us. And instead of branding it and keeping it Marriott-only training, we made it available to other hospitality companies through the American Hotel and Lodging Association. And in 2017, because we were getting so much positive feedback from this training and seeing that it was having positive results, we gained consensus internally as a company about making the training mandatory across our entire global portfolio. So by educating our workforce, the hospitality industry generally, and members of the public, we've really taught people to see something and say something, and we've quickly become an industry leader in prevention through those efforts. At year-end 2019, we have trained just under 700,000 of our own workforce that are capable of recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior. And because of our efforts, we've really gotten much more public recognition than we ever expected. Our CEO, Arne Sorensen, was invited to speak about our efforts at Davos. We recently appeared at a Capitol Hill policy panel on prevention of human trafficking. And we didn't do it for those public efforts, but I'm glad that we're getting them because I think it shines a spotlight on the issue and it helps everyone to be willing to come forward and say something.
And I think that this is a great example of where we've learned from other leaders. I think, when we looked at the work that Marriott was doing and others, we started to think about how we could leverage our assets to kind of play a bigger role. So, we don't think forced labor or trafficking has any place in our own business, and we work hard to prevent that through our responsible sourcing work and other programs. But we have a lot of assets around that we might bring to bear on the broader issue. So we don't run hotels, but we do have a lot of stores. We also operate a pretty big truck fleet. It's one of the largest private truck fleets in the US. And again, kind of inspired by some of the other people who are leading in this space, we joined Truckers Against Trafficking. We've trained over 7,000 of our truck drivers on how to spot trafficking risks as they're out, being kind of the eyes and ears, what to do if they see risks of trafficking when they're out in their jobs. So again, learning from one another, learning from peers, even if they're not similar programs like ours, but kind of inspired us to think about how we could use our assets to make a difference. So I'll turn back to Genevieve and ask, so what do you think we should be doing as companies to kind of maximize the impact of our efforts? So we have a lot of programs going on now. What should we be doing, or what can we be doing differently to make an even bigger difference?
I don't know. I think there was, because of the spotlight on this issue, there was certainly a ramp up of a number of organizations focusing on that, which is great. But it often then causes a little bit of fracture and a lot of talking and maybe a little bit less doing than we should be all doing. So I think part of it is a rationalization, so understanding where is the greatest impact, who's having the greatest impact. And recognizing that there is no silver bullet. I think we've heard that over and over and over again today, is like, this takes hard work. And it is going to be constantly hard work, and we need to recognize that as companies that we're kind of part of this journey, and we need to constantly try to do better and understand what's working well and what do we need to improve upon. And so to that point, we have certainly invested in a number of different levers, a number of different ways to start addressing this. So one is around the peer collaboration and understanding where can we engage most effectively that's going to have the greatest impact, looking at certification of these labor recruitment firms and which ones can we feed into, which ones are going to be ones that we then can be the end consumers of in terms of labor certification, and then looking at innovative approaches as well. One of the things that I'm excited about are some of the pilot projects that we're running in this area using technology. So we're testing out the use of blockchain in terms of smart contracts, and how can that help us in terms of having greater transparency of the recruiting process, tracking recruitment fees, understanding, making sure that contracts aren't changing at the time of recruitment throughout the employment. So looking at the different levers, whether it's through the collaboration, looking at some of these certifications and looking at innovative approaches, and then recognizing that we're going to need to iterate and consistently do a little self-reflection about how we can do better the next time.
Fantastic. Patty, same question?
Yeah, I think we acknowledge we're not experts in this field. We try to run a great hotel, but we look to our partnerships with organizations like Expat USA or Polaris, who really understand human trafficking and are on the cutting edge of best practices for reporting and prevention. In addition to those partnerships, I don't think you can ever be content to sort of sit on your laurels and say we're done. As a company, we have a multinational workforce. We've got to look at how we can translate our training into even more languages. Currently, we have it in 17 languages, but we know that even more are spoken in our workforce. We are looking at things like, how do we take this training to the next level so that managers have even better guidance on what to do when they receive reports, and better awareness, in addition to sex trafficking, but of compulsory labor or forced labor that they may observe through staffing firms and the like. We're also trying to work to make our training, continue to make it more available. We're working with Expat USA. We're now moving our platform or our curriculum over to them, where they'll open source it. But to try and continue to be an industry leader and not just say, stick a pin in it, we're done.
Good. No, I think the there's just so much work going on in this space that there's a lot to learn from and a lot to do. I'll comment on, I guess, 3 areas. One is the continued focus on collaboration, which we've heard a lot about today. The second is really kind of steps we're taking to engage governments in a really hopefully productive way. And then third is how we're using philanthropy to try to make a difference. On the collaboration point, and I think as Genevieve mentioned, there are a lot of efforts underway to try to make a difference in this space, especially in what kind of we're focused most on is forced labor and supply chains. And these are really complex issues. Supply chains are complex. The facilities and the workers in Walmart's supply chain are also in Coca-Cola's supply chain and are also in Amazon's supply chain and are also in Target's supply chain. And so these aren't issues that any one organization can solve alone. So groups like the Leadership Group for Responsible Recruitment, groups like the Responsible Labor Initiative that's run by the Responsible Business Alliance, it's a lot of acronyms. Those are really forums where companies who are trying to make a difference in this space can get together and work with other leading organizations that they can learn from, problem solve together with, also work with people from the non-governmental organization community, work with people from government agencies. These are complicated problems, and kind of ring fencing your own supply chain and trying to solve problems there is not the path to success.
Could I just piggyback on one thing you said? In terms of the government involvement, what we often find with state and local governments is that they're not aware of what's already being done. And so we've really tried to get on the front lines when new legislation is proposed, for example, legislating hotel training on human trafficking, that we let them know what's already out there, try and get buy-in that this training satisfies all the requirements that they might have. For example, we engaged with the state of Connecticut in 2017 when they were the first state to mandate this type of training, and they took the Marriott training and said this is the state standard. And so I think getting in early before there are mandates imposed that aren't necessarily workable or understand the business realities is really helpful, or has been helpful to us. I'm sure you as well.
Absolutely, and I think there's, we heard earlier in the day about the challenges with data and information and those types of things. I think companies have assets that they can bring to bear that they can kind of proactively collaborate, especially with law enforcement. We have some examples from here in the U.S. We have a sort of department or team within Walmart called the Investigative Risk Operations Center, which is kind of the analytical hub that uses all of our data and technology to try to support our own internal legal departments and investigative teams. But they've found a lot of success collaborating with state and local law enforcement around the country on various cases, and they're starting to explore how they can collaborate on human trafficking cases as well. Coming back to the kind of government engagement in the supply chain work, we've, through a lot of our collaborations like the Responsible Business Alliance and others, we participate in roundtables where we're engaging with government agencies from countries we source from, so the Thai government, the government in Malaysia, also agencies where labor comes from often, even if we don't source directly from there, like Myanmar, to really push for, we believe pretty strongly that a kind of effective laws and effective enforcement of those laws is really important to create lasting change in this space. And so engaging those national governments on what we see as best practice, what they can learn from other governments, how they can work together to bolster their own laws is really important. And then finally, last point I'll mention is just our philanthropic work. Through the Walmart Foundation and walmart.org, we do try to bring philanthropy to bear to help solve some of these problems. In 2019, we made our third major grant to the International Justice Mission, looking at trafficking and forced labor work in Asia. We've made similar grants to other organizations. We made a grant to Stronger Together to look at creating a responsible recruitment marketplace here in the U.S. for agriculture workers. So a lot of different ways we can bring philanthropy to bear, and I know that certainly Walmart and other organizations are bringing that tool to the fight as well. Let me kind of go to the next question, and that is, what are the biggest challenges we're facing as we think about how companies engage in this? What are the obstacles you're facing now, and how can we overcome them?
I don't know. I do want to come back maybe to the point around the government engagement, because that probably is the greatest challenges around the effective rule of law in so many of the countries and territories where we operate, and engaging with the governments locally and at the federal level to implement the laws on their books. And I do want to say, though, I think there is an opportunity. You obviously have 3 big companies here, but there is a role for regulation to help us engage all companies on this topic. And having that kind of smart regulation is something that helps us to, obviously, we want to continue to be leaders in this, and we want to be able to come here and share some of the work that we're doing so that people are kind of aware of how companies want to do the right thing and want to make a difference. But smart regulation that can help us obviously push the needle, but it can also help us engage some of the small and medium enterprises as well in driving that. And I think that might be some of the challenges, the greatest challenges is around the rule of law, but second is getting to that industry tipping point. It's one thing if some of these big companies are making these changes, are we to the point of getting to that industry tipping point where we are collectively doing what we need to do to eradicate human trafficking and forced labor in our supply chains?
Thank you, Genevieve. Patty, what are the big challenges you're facing?
I would agree on the government collaboration. I think, to the points you all have already made, I think trying to weave these priorities in through your third-party vendors and your suppliers is incredibly challenging and continues to be a challenge for us. We've recently decided that for any staffing firms we have in the U.S. who might work on, for example, at one of our properties, supply housekeepers, valet, whatever, they have to take our human trafficking training as well so that they'll be equally alert. And we're trying to ensure that we're doing what we can and collaborating with others to shine a spotlight on recruitment scams, which I think is what part of what Genevieve's alluding to. I wasn't aware of it before I worked for Marriott, but a number of scammers will create websites or solicit job applicants pretending to be affiliated with a brand company, and then either solicit personal information from the individual that they use for identity theft, or they solicit fees that are supposedly for work visas or work permits. Unfortunately, usually we hear from the person after they've already turned over their information or their fees, but we've tried to elevate that issue so that it gets more public awareness, and it's another one of those issues where if once job seekers become aware of it, they'll be more on the alert, and they will understand that we only will communicate with them from certain domain names, and that we won't require fees, and that we will only accept applications through our online portal. So all of those things to try and help prevent members of the public from, and this is a global problem, members of the public from becoming vulnerable and victimized by these scammers.
I had not heard of that one, so something else for us to all worry about. I guess coming back to the supply chain part, one of the big challenges we're facing that we're really focused on trying to solve is just that the risks in the supply chain often happen far upstream in the supply chain. We talked about our auditing programs earlier, but we do a pretty good job of auditing the facilities that are producing the final product that you buy at Walmart. And so if you're buying a private brand garment or a private brand electronic component or some piece of merchandise, there's a good chance that we have audited and feel pretty good about the facility that produced that product. We have less visibility to where the raw materials came from, where the ingredients came from, if it's food, those types of things. But we know there are risks there. And so figuring out the right way to understand what those risks are and address them is a big challenge we're facing. We've heard a number of times Thai seafood reference today. If you think about the risk of forced labor in the Thai seafood industry, the risk really isn't at the place where the seafood is processed and packaged that we then buy it from. And so take shrimp, for example. It's not where the shrimp is processed and packaged. The risk really isn't even in the aquaculture facility where they're growing the shrimp. The primary risk in the forced labor in shrimp is on these small fishing vessels that are catching junk fish. And that junk fish is then sold to a processor who turns it into fish meal. And then it is then sold to a processor who turns that fish meal into fish food that is then sold to the aquaculture supplier who's growing the shrimp and feeding it the fish food. And so it's 4 or 5 steps up the supply chain is really where the risk is. And our social compliance audits don't reach those places. And so that's why collaboration becomes really important. We work with other organizations through the Seafood Task Force, including big competitors like Costco and others. We work with the Thai government. The Seafood Task Force is trying to come up with vessel monitoring solutions and supply chain compliance tools to really try to address that issue. But there are risks upstream in a lot of different industries, and so we need to all work together to get better visibility in supply chains, to come up with the right tools and solutions that address compliance in those supply chains. And that's a big challenge that we're facing.
Can I just tag on to
Please.
that?
We're waiting for Coke to solve it.
Certainly echo that one of the things that certainly I would see as a major risk in our supply chain is deeper down into the supply chain, and for us that means agricultural commodities. So one of the ways that we've started to think about this is to look at what are the key commodities in our supply chain and what kind of tools can we bring in. So one of the ways that we did that was to look most recently at sugarcane in 20+ key markets and do almost basically a landscape study, understanding what the industry looks like on 3 key human rights issues: forced labor and human trafficking being one, child labor being another, and land rights being the third. And really tried to do this in a way that is, again, not so much site-specific and auditing, but looking at stakeholder engagement, understanding what are the laws and the history in the area, and then doing on-site visits to the various farms and the communities. Those then we have since published, so there's about 20 of these studies on our website, and as a next iteration is to say, okay, then collectively, we're not gonna be able to solve these pretty systemic issues in these countries. How do we partner up with our peers? How do we partner with the government to start to address these issues that I think Jeff really noted that they're not as easy for us. We don't have the leverage that we might have in our direct suppliers.
Good. We've got 5 minutes left, it looks like. I just got the sign. So I guess I'll ask each panelist to talk about an opportunity that they're excited about. And I'll go first because I just threw this question at them and didn't warn them. And so I'll talk about an opportunity that I'm excited about. You heard a lot today about supporting victims and survivors. And I think there have been a number of companies who have stepped forward and tried to play a role in that. I'm not sure what Walmart's role is or how we could support survivors. We have a couple of pilot programs that I'm excited about that we're doing actually in our UK business. We own a retailer in the UK called Asda. And there are 2 programs at Asda that I think are exciting. One of those is a program we started internally called Ingredients for Life. And it actually takes we have a test kitchen at our Asda headquarters where our private brands teams work to develop new private brand food items. So it's this really great innovation kitchen, this test kitchen where we test new food. We started this Ingredients for Life program where we're working with a local nonprofit to bring in trafficking victims into that test kitchen to teach them life skills, to teach them culinary skills, to build confidence, to teach them teamwork skills. It's not job training, really. It really is about just teaching them life skills, but it's using, again, the assets we have to try to make a difference on this problem, not directly connected to our business, but a way we can leverage our assets. And then we have another program in the UK where we've partnered with an organization called Bright Future. where we're actually taking some of our, we have some food processing facilities through a company that ASDA owns called IPL. And we're actually taking victims of trafficking in for 4-week kind of job internships, where we're teaching them how to work in these processing facilities. And then at the end of that program, they get a non-competitive job interview for a job if they would like it. And so another kind of area where we're exploring how we can support survivors of human trafficking. So that's something I'm pretty excited about. I'll let Genevieve and Patty have the last word on what they're excited about.
I'll start. The one thing we're excited about is sort of taking the resources that we've already developed and finding those key opportunities to use them. What are those events that attract people that unfortunately are events where human trafficking occurs? So, for example, the Super Bowl, doing an intensive training session with all the hotels in Market to make sure that they're on their toes and aware of the possibilities so that they can cooperate with law enforcement if the situation arises. But I think also we're excited about not just ending our involvement in terms of handing over those reports to law enforcement, but also helping survivors. As you've said, we've formed a partnership with the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery. They promote employability of survivors for human trafficking, and we look forward to opportunities to help people get on their feet after having been victimized.
Exciting work. Genevieve?
Well, I really love both of those ideas. I might steal some of those. I would come back to, I'm excited about some of our pilot projects, and specifically around some of the technology that we're trying to use and how that can help us get beyond that first tier and start to track down the recruitment, and whether new technologies like this blockchain project might be something. This one in particular is a public-private partnership, and so I'm excited about that this might be something that can be pretty scalable. I mean, it's early in it, but I like the idea of scalability, and as a company that's in 200 plus countries and territories, we're always looking at how we can test out something, but then bring that idea to scale, and I'm hoping that some of these new ideas and innovations will do that.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for sticking with us after a long day. Really appreciate it, and thank you so much to our two panelists.